The word God carries a lot of weight. It can feel comforting, confusing, inspiring, or even divisive, sometimes all at once. And yet, despite how often it comes up in conversations, prayers, books, and debates, we rarely stop to ask, are we all even talking about the same thing? The truth is, we're often not. Some people speak of God as a personal presence they felt in moments of joy or sorrow. Others treat God as a philosophical concept, something to be pondered more than worshipped. And then there are those who see God as more of a cultural symbol passed down through stories, rituals, and traditions. To bring a little clarity to all this, I want to introduce a simple framework, the Trichotomy of God, I call it. It's a way of understanding three distinct versions of the same word. First, there's the conceptual God, the shared idea of God that lives in books, institutions, and human history. Then, there's the actual God, whatever God may truly be, apart from any of us and what we think and feel. And finally, there's the perceptual God, the personal sense of God each person carries, shaped by their own life and lens. This framework explores how these three versions of God shape the way we think, speak, and feel about the divine. By gently teasing them apart, we can better understand not just why people believe different things, but how those beliefs form and evolve. And maybe in the process, we can learn to listen to one another a little more patiently, whether we see the world through faith, doubt, or somewhere in between. So, you may be asking yourself, why does this matter? In today's world, conversations about faith can feel like walking through a minefield. People are passionate for good reason, but that passion often turns into misunderstanding, judgment, or even outright hostility. It's not just that we disagree, it's that we don't always realize what we're disagreeing about. Are we debating someone's personal experience, challenging a cultural idea, questioning the very nature of reality itself? That's why this trichotomy matters. It gives us language for something most people feel but don't quite know how to express, that not all gods are created equal in conversation. One person may be defending a deeply personal relationship with God, while another is critiquing a religious institution, and both walk away feeling unheard. But when we start to name these layers, conceptual, actual, and perceptual, we create space for clarity and compassion. This framework doesn't demand agreement. Instead, it encourages understanding. And in a time when division seems louder than ever, anything that helps us slow down, listen better, and speak more gently is worth exploring. Whether you believe, doubt, or sit somewhere in the middle, this is an invitation to approach the conversation with a little more grace. When people refer to God in conversation, they're often not talking about a personal being they know, but rather an idea, a cultural, historical, or even philosophical construct. This is the conceptual God, the version of God that lives in texts, traditions, symbols, and societal structures. It's the God of religion classes, public debates, and political speeches. It's the God whose name is invoked in national mottos, whose image is painted in cathedrals, and whose teachings are quoted, sometimes loosely, as a moral authority. The trouble is, when people use the term God in this abstract way, they often assume everyone else means the same thing. But the conceptual God isn't a singular idea, it's a patchwork of collective imagination, doctrine, and cultural interpretation. A Christian and a Hindu may both use the word God, but they're pointing to wildly different concepts. Even within one faith, interpretations vary. One person's loving father might be another person's distant judge. This becomes especially confusing in discussions that aim to be philosophical or political. Someone might criticize God as an outdated idea, while another defends God as the cornerstone of their personal life, yet both could be referring to entirely different things without realizing it. The conversation breaks down not because of malice, but because the shared word hides an unshared meaning. Understanding the conceptual God helps us pause before we argue, because we first have to ask, which God are we talking about? What does God mean to me? If the conceptual God is the one we inherit from society, the perceptual God is the one we have in our private life, if we have one at all. This is the God of individual experience. It's shaped not by doctrine or culture, but by memory, emotion, pain, joy, and quiet moments when something greater seems to press against the veil of ordinary life. For some, this God feels close and comforting. For others, distant or even frightening. And for many, the perceptual God doesn't arrive at all, but the absence is still felt and forms its own kind of belief in the form of disbelief. Every person's perceptual God is different, even those who share a religion. One might feel God in nature, another in music, another in prayer, and yet another only in suffering. Two people might sit side by side at the same church pew and walk away having met two entirely different deities, or none at all. This kind of variation is normal, even if it's rarely acknowledged out loud. The challenge comes when people assume their personal perception is the reality. When someone says, God told me this, or God would never allow that, they may be speaking sincerely, but they're drawing from a deeply personal lens. And when that lens is projected as universal truth, friction inevitably follows. Others, with different experiences or no experiences at all, may feel unseen or even invalidated. Recognizing the perceptual God reminds us that belief is not a one-size-fits-all. It asks us to respect the mystery of another's experience, even when it doesn't match our own. After all, if someone's God feels different from yours, that doesn't necessarily make either of you wrong. It just means you've both encountered something or someone in a way that only you individually could. The split between conceptual and perceptual God isn't just an abstract idea. It has real consequences for how we speak, argue, and understand one another. At first glance, two people might seem to be debating theology or belief, but in reality, they might not even be using the word God to mean the same thing. Take a phrase like, "In God we trust." One person might see it as a cultural relic, an example of the conceptual God embedded in systems, institutions, and national identity. It's not even a statement of faith to them, but of history or even control. To another person, however, they might see it that the same phrase is a deeply personal, a nod to the perceptual God that they turn to for protection, guidance, and strength. To them, it's not just words or currency or a motto on a wall, it's a declaration of a relationship and trust. So, when these two people clash, one calling the phrase exclusionary or outdated, the other defending it with heartfelt conviction, they're not actually disagreeing about the same God. Not really. They're each drawing from entirely different wells of meaning, and unless that difference is recognized, the conversation will likely spiral into frustration, with both sides feeling unheard or misunderstood, and even angry. This is why the distinction matters. It's not about judging individual beliefs, but about realizing that our shared language can hide unshared meanings. Recognizing the gap between the conceptual and the perceptual doesn't solve every disagreement, but it gives us a way to talk through them instead of past them. It invites a little more patience, a little more curiosity, and maybe, if we're lucky, a little more understanding. At the heart of all this, the layers of meaning, the clashing perspectives, the centuries of debate, there is a question of the actual God. That is, if there is a God, what is God truly like? Not as we describe, perceive, worship, fear, or imagine, but as God exists or doesn't apart from all of that. Independent of doctrines, untouched by emotion, unaffected by belief or unbelief, the actual God is not the concept in our heads or the presence in our hearts. It's whatever is really there, if anything is at all. In a way, this is the only God that truly matters in an objective sense, because whether billions believe or none believe, whether God is loved, hated, misunderstood, or completely ignored, it doesn't change what is. If God exists, then God simply is, with or without our consent. If God doesn't exist, then no amount of tradition or passion can summon him into being. Ironically, despite how much of our world is shaped by theology, this is the God we talk about the least, because this God is unknowable, not in a poetic or mystical way, but in a literal one. The actual God is obstructed by layers of culture and perception, like a mountain buried beneath fog and myths. We can guess, we can believe, we can deny, but we can't reach with certainty. And that's what makes the split between the conceptual and perceptual gods so important. It reminds us that much of our discourse, especially in religious or political spaces, isn't really about God at all. It's about what people think God is, or how they feel God acts, or what God means to their identity, their history, their pain. The name God is used constantly, but rarely does it point beyond the human lens. So, this isn't about proving or disproving God, it's about understanding the way we talk about God and how messy, emotional, and layered that talk has become. The actual God, if there is one, exists entirely outside that tangle, but unless we can name the threads, we'll stay tangled all the same. It's absolutely okay to talk about what God means to you. In fact, it's beautiful. Whether your understanding comes from sacred text, personal experience, family tradition, or even quiet doubt, it matters. These beliefs shape who we are, how we love, how we grieve, and how we hope. Conversations about God aren't the problem. The problem is, we often walk into them assuming everyone else is picturing the same thing. When someone says, God is love, or God is cruel, or God doesn't exist, those statements feel like firm declarations, but they may be referring to entirely different visions. One person might be thinking of an institutional concept of God tied up in systems they believe have caused harm. Another might be speaking from a deeply personal relationship with what they see as a source of peace and purpose. And if those two people start arguing, it's going to get loud, not because one is right and the other is wrong, but because they're not even having the same conversation. That's what makes this moment in time feel so charged. We're all using the same language, but the meanings are fractured. Our sentences snap together like puzzle pieces that almost fit, enough to sound coherent, but not enough to hold any real understanding. And until we take a moment to slow down and ask each other, wait, what do you mean by God? We'll keep talking past one another. We'll keep mistaking disagreement for hostility and difference for danger. So no, this isn't a call for everyone to agree on who or what God is. That's not realistic, and maybe not even necessary, but it is a call for clarity, for a little more humility in how we speak, and a little more patience in how we listen. If we can start there, not with answers, but with honest questions, then maybe we'll stop arguing with shadows and start understanding the people behind them. At the end of the day, this conversation isn't just about God, it's about us. It's about the way we speak to each other, especially when we disagree. In so many of our arguments, whether about religion, politics, identity, or values, we assume we're all working with the same definitions. But more often than not, we're not even speaking the same language. When someone says something we disagree with, our instinct is often to push back, hard. But how often do we pause and ask, what do you mean by that? Not as a trap, not to win, just to understand. Because without that question, we end up fighting over phantoms, our own assumptions standing in for the person in front of us. The Trichotomy of God is just one example of how tangled things can get. But it also offers a simple, powerful lesson. Words are shared, but meanings are personal. If we can learn to ask better questions, to slow down, get curious, and give each other the grace of explanation, we might just find a little more common ground than we thought. So let this be a gentle reminder. Before you judge someone's beliefs, try to understand what they're actually saying. Before you speak for God or against God, take a moment to figure out which one you mean. And above all, treat the people around you with the same decency you hope to receive, because clarity is important, but kindness, that's sacred. And these days, there's just not enough of it. And we need to change that. And with that, I would like to end with a poem that I wrote regarding wisdom. Few there are who seek its light, fewer still who hold it true. Not just knowing, not just thought, but knowing what to do. It is not words in polished gold, nor lines that sound refined. Wisdom is the weight of truth and knowing when to change your mind. To know what's known, to know what's not. to see the gaps, to learn what's real, to judge who speaks with steady hands and who just tells you what you feel, to stand unshaken, firm in place, yet move when new paths call. For wisdom bends but does not break. It does not fear to rebuild all. It knows the weight of stone and steel, but dares to tear them down. It wields a blade, but strikes it not, unless the cut saves more than crowns. It walks with care, but never kneels before the fools who claim to know, for wisdom sees behind the masks and hears the cracks beneath their show. It knows when trust is worth the risk and when to walk alone instead, to take a step with doubt in hand, yet never let it forge your tread. It does not claim to be complete, nor ever reach a final shape, for wisdom is the road itself, not just the goal, nor just the fate. Yet still it climbs, and still it moves, forever sharp, forever reaching, to stand, to yield, to learn, to build, a masterwork forever teaching.